As a more casual fan of Five Nights at Freddy's, I think my favorite piece of Five Nights at Freddy's cultural trivia surrounds the virtual reality game Help Wanted. In the narrative, Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria, the company, hired a game developer to dispel the rumors of haunted animatronics. But as it turns out, William Afton, the guy who killed the kids who possessed the animatronics, has become a kind of computer virus. These games get very stupid very fast. This computer virus mind controls the beta tester, a woman named Vanessa, maybe his daughter in the games, definitely his daughter in the movie. To cut a long story short, the fake developer was kind of just a cutesy excuse to expand on the lore while letting people diegetically play the first few FNAF games. But that's not what happened. A not insignificant portion of the Five Nights at Freddy's fanbase became convinced that this meant that the first few FNAF games were in fact propaganda by the Freddy Fazbear Company. This is a franchise where a portion of the fans believed that it was willing to say the first few FNAF games were pointless, sacrificing any emotional or thematic meaning in the pursuit of never-ending, inexplicable lore. And then they made a movie out of it.
What sets this movie apart from others is the care that was taken with the story to create something based on a beloved game.
The Five Nights at Freddy's movie is bad. It does that annoying thing that horror films do where it has fake jump scares. The story has a lot to do with dreams, and the main character, Michael, going into his dreams to find his brother's killer. And so the actual story-relevant jump scares look like fucking this. Okay, so the kids can harm you in a dream, I guess, and their eyes are filled with, like, ink or whatever. Why are their eyes filled with ink? It's so fucking hilariously bad. I just don't know what tone they were going for in this movie. I think we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's start at the beginning with a rather minor critique. The opening of this film is pretty bad. A lot of horror movies have a scary opening where a character not essential to the plot dies. Even Psycho has one, although it is 40 minutes long, so some cowards will say that it doesn't really count. In Five Nights at Freddy's, it's an as-of-yet undisclosed industrial-looking place and a security guard who is being stalked by an unseen creature. Turns out it's a pizzeria. I get that it's backstage, but it doesn't really look like that. That's understandable, at least. Saying nothing of how boring it is, Get Out's opening is probably the worst part of the whole film, effectively pointless even, and I still love that movie. And then the intro gets even worse. Turns out the guy didn't die here, and instead his death is the result of just this near incomprehensible mass of whirling saws. It's just not a good opening. This intro muddies the whole film. The mystery should be who or what killed him, not what the fuck is this thing I'm staring at? It just doesn't work for an intro. It feels alien in an unhelpful way. Like, yes, questions about this will be answered later, but people know what a knife is. People know what kidnapping is. People don't know what this strange device is, and it's not very relevant to the plot of the movie. Even weirder horror openings like It Follows are still pretty understandable. Do you want to know the only narrative point for this opening? Literally, it's to explain why in the third act, Michael is able to unscrew a screw slightly quicker. Very efficient screenplay. Make the viewer's first impression of your movie an explanation for why the main character is able to get out of a chair. Any comprehensible ideas are saved for when the animatronics are fully introduced. Why does the robbery scene contain more grounded ideas than the opening? A good example of a horror intro that has a purpose, establishes ideas, and sets a tone is the 1960s horror Peeping Tom, in which a prostitute is murdered by a man with a camera. Other than being beautifully shot, look at this extreme long shot, looks like something out of a pulpy noir magazine, imagery that recurs throughout the narrative, it also has a mystery built in. The woman leads the man up to her bedroom, and as she sits on the bed, her face is illuminated by a piercing glow. She seems distressed by whatever this glow is, and as she is killed, it hard cuts to a view of a projector, projecting the visage of her death upon a wall to be watched by her murderer. It's a great opening, because it establishes a lot of the themes and ideas of the movie, and has a mystery that is relevant. Where the massive saws is barely relevant to Five Nights at Freddy's, The Glow is incredibly relevant to the ideas of Peeping Tom. No, I'm not going to tell you what it is, go watch the film yourself. Again, this is a minor critique, but this opening is a tone setter, because as the film goes on, you slowly start to notice this film kind of feels like it was written by committee. The film is kind of a horror comedy, kind of, like it's generally not funny.
But I want the fudge on the side because I don't want it to melt the ice cream. And 3 cherries.
Woman orders specific ice cream. Wow, what a great observation. I don't want to sound like I lack whimsy, but the ante really annoys me, and I think it's only half intentional.
And if I don't?
Well, then my lawyer and I will have to take you to court.
I don't know what direction she was given, but it's just so unnatural and cartoony in a bad way.
Talking to magical creatures who do not exist.
I don't really know what the film is going for with the cupcake, but I think the only way that I could effectively express how I feel about it is by saying, I don't find it very funny. Like, the original Five Nights at Freddy's is pretty funny. It turns out the main character was working for 24 bucks a day at a haunted pizzeria. There's an event in the narrative called The Bite of 87, and it's pretty good, dark, satirical comedy.
They used to be allowed to walk around during the day, too. But then there was The Bite of 87. Yeah. It's amazing that the human body can live without the frontal lobe.
The idea of a company desperately trying to hang on after an animatronic fucking murdered some guy and bit half of his brain out, assumedly in front of children, is pretty good satire. Compare these jokes to the movie.
How's the pay?
Not great. But the hours are worse.
Haha, the hours are worse. Oh, that is a sublime joke, witty and satirical. I believe that deserves a single applause. That doesn't mean the film's full of duds. I mean, there's this joke.
As a matter of fact, I shouldn't be here at all.
Sit down, Doug.
Why don't we just kill him?
Like, that's funny. I like that. It's just, I don't know, the movie's already so unscary that I just don't see the point in all these jokes. You want to make a comedy, go make a damn comedy. But that's not the only thing I mean when I say it feels like it was written by committee. When I say written by committee, I also mean it's passable writing that makes itself worse by feeling so plastic and commercial. Like a movie that, while coherent, leaves a lot to be desired in terms of actual in-depth storytelling. The film feels so surface level. The script is surprisingly tight, like you watch it and a lot of things have a necessity to the script. There's very little fat on this bone. It's too bad there's also very little meat. It's just a bone. There's marrow, but I'm not a dog. I'm not gonna eat bone marrow. Bad metaphor, way too much detail, gotta delete that from the script. Take the theme of children's drawings throughout the narrative. It begins with Mike's kid sister who draws and is brought more attention to after Mike's custody of her is challenged. A B-plot we're not even going to discuss in this video because it is so boring.
You know, pictures hold tremendous power for children.
So you see this scene and you go, oh, this is foreshadowing. This is the foreshadowing scene in the script.
These are things children learn to communicate almost exclusively through pictures.
All I did was save this kid's balloon from floating away, and he made me this.
Should have kept the balloon. That's a shit drawing.
As it turns out, yes, William Afton is using a picture of him holding the ghost children's hands to mind control them, Get Out style, into doing his murderous bidding. This narrative element concludes with, I think, one of the funniest endings of a film I've ever seen, in which Abby draws a picture of William Afton with a frowny face, killing the children, and then the stupid fucking animatronics realize that he's the guy who killed them.
Rabbit, he controls them.
The drawings show them what really happened.
Yeah, we get it. That's like one of the only things you set up throughout the movie. See what I mean? All this foreshadowing is hardly impressive. It's so cold and clinical. Setting things up should feel a little more natural than this. This is this character's only use in the script, to set up the finale of the film. Why is this her only point? If the previous scene is about a guy getting the custody of his sister challenged, why not have a police officer there? A police officer named Vanessa, a character who is part of the movie. Add some actual interest to Vanessa's character, that she was initially grooming Mike to take the job at Freddy Fazbear by appealing to emotions surrounding his sister, while also subtly hinting at how Afton is controlling the children. That's character depth. What isn't character depth is having a frankly hilarious looking shot of her staring at the pictures. Why is she pulling that face? When Get Out wants to set up a lot of the main theming and threat of the film, it uses Chris talking to one of the main villains. That's how you make a tight, waterproof script. Don't just create characters out of nowhere to express a bullet point. You know what, let's just get into it. The movie should be darker. In good horror films, darkness is used mainly because it's scary. That's pretty obvious, but it also helps. It fills in the details. You know, when you watch a movie like Alien, a guy in a costume under the right lighting suddenly turns into like a fucking crazy looking creature. It's the same thing in the FNAF games. There is a huge difference between these renders of the animatronics and the ones in the game. They're actually scary looking in the game, and I thought, perhaps naively, that was intentional, that these games were about recontextualizing these child-friendly robots. Then you look at similar shots in the movie and go, oh, they just didn't care about lighting at all in this film. Look at how the animatronics are just bathed in light. I thought this was a horror movie. Is this daylight horror? Is this Midsommar? And the security cameras are even worse. Look at how bright they are. Like, what kind of fucking security camera is this? A security camera that shows every fucking pore on Chica's face? Why is there even a fucking security camera pointed at a vent? Like, the blind spot on this camera must be astronomical. Shut down since the 1980s, by the way, uses like square televisions, but 4K resolution on these cameras that stream with little delay. Also, they don't stream in color. 4K resolution couldn't figure out how to get the color right. Normally, I wouldn't give as much of a fuck, but this is Five Nights at Freddy's. The security cameras are one of the few things they have direct reference for. You know, your movie's kind of gone to shit in the production sense when a scene where you're supposed to empathize with the animatronics and a scene where they murder a man have the same lighting, the same composition. Substantially, these are visually similar scenes, which is fucking wild. I cannot be the only motherfucker who thinks the movie should be darker. I was initially kind of sad because they didn't really utilize the security cameras in the narrative very much, but on reflection, if this is the kind of effort they wanted to put in for the security cameras, I'm glad. How much effort would it take to just buy a shitty security camera? It's so unexpressive, it never makes me feel anything. It is also, I'm sorry, just very funny how expressive their faces are.
And all the animatronics have such a personality.
Chica, she looks happy, and then boom, she gets really scary.
Sometimes it's the subtlety that really sells the character.
Sometimes it's the subtlety, like when they do comically angry eyes. Why is that a functionality? I really don't want to be rude. The Jim Henson Company did a very good job translating these animatronics into, you know, real life.
I think Foxy at full movement capacity took like 6 puppeteers to operate. So we were, you know, using a lot of really, really talented people to make these characters come to life.
6 people? That's crazy. Maybe you should have got 6 people to look at the lighting and composition, because it looks like he's gliding on Aladdin's magic fucking carpet. The dance scene makes them look really good, and I can at least understand what they're going for in these scenes, but everything else looks pretty bad. But of course, none of this really matters. If the story is engaging, then the animatronics can look as dog shit as they want. At least that's what I tell my children that I have, so they can sleep at night. I whisper sweet nothings in my children's ears about Five Nights at Fredbear's.
My name is Markiplier and welcome to Five Nights at Fuckboys. Now,
it has the most compelling story. Like, if you watch the gameplay and it's all abstract, like mini games and stuff, and then you get a synopsis of the plot, and it's like, Oh, Scott Cawthon thinks child abuse is bad. All right. Please, Scott Cawthon, take me on a decade-long narrative puzzle so you can discuss how bad child murder is. And the movie strikes us up tenfold, because the film is a dry retelling of a story from a series of games and novels that purposely hides its ideas. It hides its ideas for a stupid reason, but also because in a traditional narrative form, the themes of Five Nights at Freddy's are not very interesting. Vanessa reveals that the children's ghosts are not the only thing inside the animatronics, but their corpses are as well.
It's not just their ghosts that are inside of those machines. It's their bodies.
Is this supposed to be a twist? It has the cadence of a twist, but it doesn't really change anything about the movie. I don't understand the twist. It's also not like significantly more fucked up than just murdered children. It's also revealed that William Afton, the murderer, has some kind of control over the perception of the children.
Kids, they don't want to hurt anyone. He influences them somehow. He took everything from them, but they don't remember.
So narratively, mind control can serve a lot of purposes, but thematically it is one thing. It's a loss of agency. Get Out is a great movie about mind control because it's also about racism, how white people will attempt to co-opt black culture for various reasons, and it's horrific. The Evil Family talk about how much they disavow slavery, and then they literally enslave the bodies of black people. Here, mind control has a very clear purpose within the film's narrative, politics, and themes. What does a loss of agency have to do with Five Nights at Freddy's? I guess generally murderers do remove agency from their victims, but I don't think that's the first thing that comes to mind when I think of how child murder is wrong. I also don't understand the dream sequences and how they fit into the narrative. Like, this is a movie about killer animatronics, and we spend more time running around after children in a forest. I guess they couldn't come up with very many interesting things to do with killer animatronics. The well is run dry on cinematic portrayals of animatronics. Willy's Wonderland, Banana Splits, that one episode of Gravity Falls, the whole genre is oversaturated. Scary Children, on the other hand, are much more interesting. But the biggest problem with the mind control plot point is that it actively makes every facet of the film's villains uninteresting. All of the scenes in which the kids are doing fucked up things are made even less scary because it really isn't kids doing it. Imagine how much more tragic it would be to have the terrified souls of children driven to insanity. That is a far more potent image of the horror of child murder. The reason that child murder is wrong is not because they have been robbed of some conceptual future. I would consider you a bad person even if you killed a child that had one day left to live. The reason that it's bad is because you're murdering a fucking child. You're turning them from a child into a corpse. Some of the best scenes in the movie are grinded underfoot by this horrible plot point. The scene in which Michael agrees to give the ghost children his sister Abby in exchange for the chance to remain in a dream is surprisingly effective horror, the best in the movie.
We want Abby.
Michael's dead mother convinces him that he shouldn't be looking after his kid sister.
It's time to let her go, sweetheart. You were never the right person to take care of her.
And as he gives her away, he gets a flash of Abby and changes his mind. In comparison to the rest of this movie, it's pretty effective. Was it mind control? Were these kids told to do this? In that case, it's suddenly a lot less scary. What exactly does the mind control say about child murder? Then there's the blanket fort scene, the comedy scene in which the animatronics Abby, Mike, and Vanessa build a blanket fort, which some people don't like, and I understand why, but I think it's one of the better scenes in the film, because it was actually trying to say something in a way that is unique and interesting. In a film that plays it so safely by the book, a scene this weird feels like a breath of fresh air. My biggest problem with it is that it doesn't make any sense. Why weren't they mind controlled here? When are they mind controlled? The point of the scene is to show the animatronics acting like children. Why then is the rest of the movie dedicated to shooting them with tasers? The mind control is a weak narrative justification so the movie could avoid being more interesting. You always need a climax against a big bad. Speaking of a big bad, the only narrative justification for the mind control is that the film is attempting to explain why they don't attack William Afton. William Afton is a sucky-ass villain.
I got this call from my manager saying, go meet this director, Emma Tammy, who's the director of the movie, and she explained, and the reason I think I ended up doing it was that this character is like the Voldemort character in Harry Potter, and that he is the center of evil in the universe.
If someone came to me and pitched their villain as a Voldemort type, I'd tell them to maybe go back to the drawing board. The center of evil? I love when everything revolves around one guy. It removes all the nuance. Me personally, I could never feel bad for murdered children if they killed someone. Better make them mind controlled. The novels have a different, better explanation for Afton not being attacked. The reason they don't attack William Afton is because they think he's an animatronic. Because he's wearing one. It's simple and to the point. These children have been dead and puppeted around in animatronics for 20 years, it's said in the 2000s. That would drive an adult insane, let alone a child. You watch a scene like Vanessa turning on the stage and making them dance and flirting with Mike while puppeting these dead children.
Wanna dance?
And it's the most horrifying shit given the implications. But the movie doesn't even think about that. What's considered an outrage by the film is that Vanessa knew the whole time.
Is there anything else that you want to tell me about Vanessa? Because you seem to know everything about this place.
And I'm just asking, how did you not? It isn't until nearly the first hour is over that Michael even sees the animatronics move and is suspicious. And it isn't until the last 30 minutes that he realizes they might be dangerous. The whole narrative lacks any tension. Like, I just can't get over the mind control. You're robbing your villains of agency and making them less scary. What events in the narrative are mind control effects, and what are just these children being children? It muddies the water narratively, and thematically, it doesn't make any sense. In a film that is about trauma, why aren't the dead children traumatized? I mentioned at the beginning of this video a story about a franchise, one that reached the point where its fans became kind of convinced that the first entries in it were narratively and thematically empty. So pointless that they believed the creators would throw them out in the pursuit of a never-ending mystery plot that doesn't resolve and means very little. The Five Nights at Freddy's movie is bad by design. Fans of the film don't understand film.
Why critics hate the FNAF movie? No spoiler. This movie, in my opinion, is not a horror movie, it's a thriller.
What's the difference?
Horror movies are made to try and scare you in whatever way they can. The story isn't usually as important, which is why characters do dumb things like hide in a shed full of knives.
I love the fact that he uses Scream as an example. The horror movie that was a satire, so literally, it is also trying to be funny. I Do Know Nothing was also really weird about Scream. Why does it attract like really bad opinions? These people believed that critics were out to get them. Critics are ruining the film for me and I don't want them to. Critics complained that the movie was bland, boring, and not scary. The reason I think critics hate the movie is because they aren't able to understand it. In order to be able to enjoy the FNAF movie, you have to be a fan of the games to walk away loving this movie. So, critics who had no basic knowledge of the game's story wouldn't understand it. There are so many cameos and things that the fans love, but for someone who has never played the games, they would think it's very boring. Also, it is listed in the horror genre, and fans know it is more story-driven than scary. Why do these people not think that Five Nights at Freddy's is a horror franchise? It almost seems like critics don't study the source material. He doesn't deserve all this hate from the critics. Come on, his performance wasn't even that bad. Proof that critics should not be trusted. Because they liked a movie I didn't. Also, it might not even be the same group of people, also the percentages, or how many critics liked the movie, not an objective score. So yeah, this is kind of what they wanted. A movie that has nothing to say. A movie that only exists to expand on an everlasting well of lore. So I have to end this video saying that Five Nights at Freddy's is a movie that succeeded. It set out to please its fan base, and it achieved that. And all that implies.
The only thing I want to explore are the things that make sense for the fan base, for Scott, for the storytelling. I mean, frankly, our job in that movie is to deliver lore.
Goodbye.